Anahid, we talk about romantic love on the phone often, in and out of subduing screaming children. So many needs. Crazy that my just 6-year-old son was throwing out wisdom about desire yesterday. He asked me to take him to the local toy shop to pick out one of those surprise inside red balls. I think of them by their skin because I find cracked half-moons around my house. When you get them at the store, they are shrink-wrapped, plastic wrapped with warnings in many languages. Do not eat the insides. And then once you pay, tender for the goods, you get to open it. A friend asked my son, "Why do you want something you don't know for $6 when you can pick out something and be sure of it?" He responded, "I love mystery." This made me think about how what you and I do is different. It plays out to you when we speak on the phone. I can tell you what I see and feel, but I need you to theorize it for me, to take the stories I tell and turn them inside out or cracked in half. The first part academic, the second poet. All this to say, I guess, I'm going to send you the below an unfiltered list of books that might be a syllabus for this talk, and also might not, because I see them there, but it's hard for me to know why or trust it. 3 to 5 word game books, like a book of anagrams, an ancient word game by Daniel H. Wishkrick. Radu and Nasser's Slim, A Cup of Rage. House of Dolls by Kazeknik 135633. Being Singular Plural, Jean-Luc Nancy. Arthur Schnitzler's Dream Story. Christine Angot Incest. Ideology in the Virtual City, Video Games, Power Fantasies, and Neoliberalism by John Bales. The Water Statues, Fleur Yegi. The Private Diaries of Catherine Deneuve, My Life Behind the Camera with Louis Buñuel. Francois Truffaut, Roman Polanski, and Lars von Trier. Nymphs by Giorgio Agamben. I don't know, I could go on forever. Tell me something.
Dear Stephanie, I'm sending you a stack, like the one in your book. This is the first brick, the ground floor. It feels good to be organized by objects again, and not just by time. Before bed, I've been taking an eyedropper full of herbal sedatives, hemlock and damiana. They knock me the fuck out. Sometime in the 6th century, a poet named Eucheria of Marseille wrote a series of 16 satirical couplets about the absurdity of being seduced by a man she considers beneath her, as if she were, in her words, like a crimson rose choked by hemlock, like a lily wed to a stinging nettle. What's next, she asks? Will even the moon choose the chaos of hell? Baby, it happens every day. Tier 1. You are fire. Your story of the red ball reminds me of Sergei Parajanov's 1969 film, The Color of Pomegranates. Soviet surrealism at its most ardently mystical. It's a series of tableaux vivants based on the life of the 18th century Armenian poet Sayat Nova, whose work I'm translating from the French, or trying to. French, because I can't read the 39 letters of the Armenian alphabet, 6 of which you need to spell my first name. Legend has it that Sayat Nova, an Ashuk or troubadour in the court of Irakli II, fell in love with the king's sister, Anna, and composed his finest and most impassioned love songs in her honor. The affair ended when the king ordered Sayat Nova into a monastery. Professional scholars dispute these tales. They say the poet was exiled for his political satires, like Ovid, or that he was already a religious man and, like Peter Abelard, only happened to make a wrong turn once. But Parajanov buys it, the love story that is. In his film's most famous scene, the poet and the princess recite his words to each other. They stand in the same room, but never at the same time. It's all done through voiceover. The actors' mouths don't move. The poem is an invisible architecture stretched out between them, a space whose limits can, at least, be sounded together. He speaks, and she speaks. The words leave his mouth as if for the first time. She seems to know them already. He is making a discovery. She is making amendments, or perhaps amends. You are fire, the poet says, dressed in fire. You are fire, his beloved agrees, but dressed in black. This second line is Parajanov's invention. It appears nowhere in the original poem. You are one thing, he says, You are two, is her reply. You are two, at least. The word ashuk comes from the Arabic ashik, meaning in love or lovelorn. Like the medieval German Minnesänger or love singers, ashuks were named after their condition. Agamben, who wrote about troubadours in his Language in Depth, thinks they discovered something fundamental about poetry, namely that it makes an event of language, that the event is always amorous, and that it is always taking place somewhere that does not really exist, in the room that only holds one occupant at a time, but where two voices or more can occasionally collide. It is a purely linguistic dimension in which love is the letter of which you are the meaning. The poet and his beloved make love an event, but also an argument. You mean what I mean when I say what you are, but we never mean the same thing to each other. Whether this is a crisis or not depends on your point of view.
How insane, but also what we know to be our psychic link, that you start the sentence with a brick. I have an email I sent to myself to tell you about the bricks as the next part of our exchange. It's similar to the email I sent myself weeks ago after we spoke. To Stephanie LaCava from Stephanie LaCava. Grenade. That too was about a dialogue we'd had on love. This brick, though, I need to tell you about first. It relates to poetry, I promise. The greatest love letter I ever sent was a JPEG of one of Marcel Broder's brick sculptures. It went unanswered. I had provided no context to its receiver, who likely judged it something other than it was. That's part of the mystery game, no? The miscommunication is inevitable, but when it hits. Grenade. To me, it's also the headiest thing. A brick is the means of an agitator. What's more romantic than being complicit in reimagining the world as it stands? Did you know there's a brick emoji? I want to come back to Broder's, the poet I can talk about. But Anahid, your knowledge is endless. You take hemlock? I take Benadryl. You're a medieval princess. My mood is oriented towards hell. Hot pink hell. I ordered persimmons on Sunday from the delivery service because they looked so magical when I scrolled by. They came dressed in white string styrofoam lattices and weren't pale blue but sick green. I almost ordered the pomegranates, but whenever I do, they just sit there as part of an altar. To me, they are first a symbol for ideas of Jewish anarchism, and the idea of it being our work to release the sparks from the shards of a once shattered vessel. Rabbi Menachem Mendel of Kotzer. There is nothing so whole than a broken heart. And in his chapter, Shattered Love, Nancy nods to him directly and indirectly. Perhaps being, in its essence, is affected by the dialectic that annihilates its simple position in order to reveal this contradiction in the becoming of reality, or of reason, of the idea of history. And in this sense, one might say that it beats, that it is essentially in the beating indeed, in the emotion of its heart, being nonetheless becoming as an infinite pulsation. And yet this heart of being is not a heart. You can break most things with bricks. A heart is harder. There's Volta Gamben too, crisis and break, disconnection and connection, in between. Fire has trouble staying in its lane. The beating of the heart, rhythm of the partition of being, syncope of the sharing of singularity cuts across presence, life, consciousness. That is why thinking, which is nothing other than the weighing or testing of the limits, the ends of presence of life of consciousness. Thinking itself is love.
That's funny. I kept changing the word and nothing felt right until brick. Dear Stephanie, I started on herbs at bedtime after I stopped drinking. I've never had a problem with booze, but I notice as I get older that the information comes in better this way. But you know what? I'm secretly annoyed by this, yet another obligation to stay alive for someone. It's one thing when it's your children, they're alone in the world, another to have your pleasures one by one relinquished until you fit in the chalk outline of a good person. There's that song, don't drink, don't smoke, what do you do? And another, anything you want. Raoul Vaneignem's The Revolution of Everyday Life ends with an allegory of bricks. For years, the people lived in a warehouse, no windows or doors, until one day a stray projectile sailed through a wall. A miracle, light, air. What is to be done? Make more windows or burn the whole thing to the ground? The gradualists, Vaneignem calls them the window piercers, win. It takes another couple centuries, but here we are, he says, a brick looks good again. Tier, or brick, 2. This is some of a poem by Bernadette Mayer. First turn to me after a shower, you come inside me sideways, as always. In the morning, you ask me to be on top of you. Then we take a nap, we're late for school. You arrive at night, inspired and drunk. There is no reason for our clothes. We take a bath and lie down facing each other. Then later, we turn over. Finally, you come. We face each other and talk about childhood. As soon as I touch your penis, I wind up coming. You ask me to hold your wrists, but then when I touch your neck with both my hands, you come. It's early morning, and you decide to very quietly come on my knee because of the children. You've been away at school for centuries. Your girlfriend has left you. You come 4 times before morning. You tell me you masturbated in the hotel before you came by. I don't believe it. I serve the lentil soup naked. I massage your feet to seduce you. You are reluctant. My feet wind up at your neck and ankles. You try not to come too quickly. Also, you don't want to have a baby. I stand up from the bath. You say, turn around, and kiss the backs of my legs and my ass. You suck my cunt for 1,000 years. You are weary. At last, I remember my father's anger, and I come. You say you can only fuck me up the ass when you are drunk. So we try it sober in a room at the farm. We lie together one night, exhausted couplets, and don't make love. Does this mean we've had enough? I send you this poem because to me, in some ways, it's fuses in words, and we chose a still from fuses as the poster for this event. The first time I ever saw it, I was in a small theater on a university campus, seated a couple rows behind a lover with whom I had just broken things off. I wept through every frame that I wanted to howl. Anyway, that's neither here nor there. How many works of art do you know that take good or good enough sex as their subject, as absorbing as the crucifixion? What fuses and Mayer's poem, with its multiple orgasms, some easy, others frustrated or withheld, have in common is their perfect inversion of the figurative logic of lyric poetry and avant-garde cinema. In his famous essay on Ostrogny, defamiliarization, or, better yet, estrangement, Victor Shklovsky says poems, riddles, and dirty jokes make familiar objects strange, and thus help us remember what it is they are truly like. Art exists, he says, that one may recover the sensation of life. It exists to make the stone stony. To make a familiar object strange, you need tools like metaphor and euphemism, puns and paraphrases. Things need to seem different from what they are. In fuses, they do at first, and then they don't. When the film starts, and periodically throughout, you're not quite sure what you're looking at. But once you know, you know. You're looking at these people fucking. Mayer's poem begins in a lofty register. Here is your Ostrogny. First, turn to me. Who talks like that? But then the twist. In the shower, the homeliest spot, mildewing and crowded. Suddenly, we know where we are. There's kids, school, genitals, soup. We are here and nowhere else. What I'm saying is, if modernism, as Shklovsky sees it, takes a basic feature of all imaginative representation, namely its indirection, its obstruction, its distortion, and elevates it to the level of technique, these two feminist responses to modernist practice suggest that nothing is more obscure than the explicit. Anything can be an allegory, but the blowjobs in fuses are not. You suck my cunt for 1,000 years defies interpretation. What's left to understand? I wish more art was like this, but I wish more sex was too.
My Anahid, first a secret to share. Carly, the real live one, once told me not to tell many people I have children. Measured advice offered at no cost to her. But Mayer's love comes on her knee quietly. You told me about relinquishing pleasure for your children. I think pleasure became an antidote to mine. I am not ashamed that the thing I gave up for them was the trap door. When I had my first son, it closed into its perfect cutout on the floor. The second son, then a brick that holds it down. I have to stay here now. I think of the line in your book on Keats' Ode to Autumn. What it wants is to show us the human incapacity for resisting beauty, to show us that it really is impossible sometimes not to love the world, even when it provides ample evidence that it should not be loved, and later forces us to inhabit an excruciating contradiction. We are attached, despite everything, to this place that has been weaponized against us.
Dear Stephanie, I get it more than I can tell you, though not for the reason you might think. I'm the friend with the life drive, the resident cheerleader. I'll show you the truest picture of love I know. It's from William Blake's Visions of the Daughters of Albion, the same poem I sent you an illustration from earlier today. I don't think it's a great work of art, but it is a work of great feeling. And so transparent in its significance, I find it almost embarrassing. Maybe that's the point, as with Fuses and Mayer. It's that rare case in which, if the absence of irony mortifies you, you're the asshole, not you. Anyway, here's one of your nymphs, maybe, a creature disarmed of everything but beauty, and yet somehow above the fray. Her name is Uthun, and the man over whom she looms is her lover, Theotormen. The name means tormented by God. In Blake's poem, Uthun is raped, which causes Theotormen, who is not the rapist, to reject her, not because she's damaged goods, but because in his mind, the act implicates her in sexuality, and he, Theotormen, has a notion of love with no room for sex. People can say what they want. I will always believe with Ellen Willis that Blake was a feminist because he believed in the fundamental goodness and wholeness of the erotic impulse, and that it is to his great credit that he, Blake, recognizes erotophobia as the polite face of sexual violence. In my writing studio, there's a poster by the anonymous and autonomous Gulf Revolutionary Artist Formation. In its center is a bouquet of roses strewn with switchblades and the sex workers' liberation slogan, "Stigma kills, kill stigma, stop the war on whores." It doesn't get more Blake than that. In his poetry, the venerated figure of the mother is everywhere replaced with a revolutionary figure he calls the harlot. For him, there is no being more righteous or pure. And so with Uthun, who refuses to feel shame in response to her assault, and instead tries to enlist the Atorman in a radically open form of intimacy. She tells him she wants to fuck him, and she wants to watch him fucking other women, and she wants him to watch her fucking other women, and so on. While she's at it, she suggests we abolish the wage. It's also optimistic you have to laugh, not in doubt but in joy, in excitement, why not? He is silent, and when he speaks, it is merely to say that he cannot hear, for he is in a night of pain. What I see in this image is compassion, hers for him. What I see is kindness without capitulation. You mentioned Nancy. I think of the essay Shattered Love, which describes love as an opening of the self to the other with such total vulnerability that the self is annihilated. I think this image, in all its sincerity, shows that Nancy's account of love is more subtle than it may at first seem. For here, the woman who has been shattered is in a position of utter sovereignty and strength, and the man who is afraid to unclench is like a frightened child. Shattered, she refracts the light of the setting sun, which mimics his position, and bends weightlessly away from the chain with which he needs to hold her in place, at a distance but no less imprisoned. I see in this image that she is free and that she grieves his bondage. I see that in his night of pain, he is ready to fall through the trapdoor of nearly white space that stretches out beneath his feet. She doesn't try and stop him. She keeps her hands to herself, and yet the whole of her is screaming. Like I said, to me, it looks like love.
Dear Anahid, Nancy's Shattered Love holds the line too that leads back to Judaism's Tikkun Olam. In Hebrew, repair of the world. To take action towards this, it's worth noting that the name of the French collective Tikkun comes from this Hebrew. Me and my nymphs, as you say. Uthun, the double O's. I don't think I need to explain what I mean. It's strange as I write you. I realize how much of what I put down is one gesture away from its intended meaning. I am leaving this here. Quadruple whole. You fill it in what I am saying, whereas when I read you, it's certain and clear. Is this because you are the friend of the life drive? Sure of leaving this here for me to find when I wake up in the morning? Or it could just be that I'm not as good a writer. I think this is true too. We talked the other day about the facile idea of always having one hand on the plug, of people who live this way. You, not you. Does this come from both of us spending too much time with French speakers as children? Can pull it out of the socket and plug it into another. The power light is suspended only until it's reanimated. Little is lost, and you are free. You, Anahid, told me that I am the opposite. I think this is true too. I carry it all around with me, full intensity. A black mass surrounded by a pale, shiny, soft woman body. I am the friend with the death drive. I too agree with Willis on Blake, on the erotic impulse. Catherine Breillat does too, but she shows it by playback of the realities of existing as a young sexual being. Her heroines are always dealing with this simplified idea of integrating the psychic with the sexual, of being the Madonna and the whore. Have you ever seen the movie Fat Girl? At the end, the heavier sister of the title's nod, Anais, quite like Anahid, is the only one left alive, and refuses to tell the police she was raped. In its denial, she takes back her story. Is she Uthun? I sent you under separate cover 3 Marcel Broder's works. Celle de Nuance, 1975. Pelle, Shovel, 1970. Échelle de Briquet, Brick Matter, 1969.
Dear Stephanie, in describing Breillat's Anais as Uthun, you've made sense of something about that film that's always haunted me and that I always wanted to express in exactly the way you have, but felt too timid to attempt. I think it's right that her insistence, which seems partly hysterical, but partly sober and severe, that she has not been raped when everyone watching the movie would say she absolutely has, is radical, epiphanic, insurgent. But Brea won't give it to you so easily. Unlike Blake, she doesn't want you merely to flip your switch from liberal sentimentality to gender abolition, and with it the expulsion of shame. There's a challenge. Sit a while in horror and see if your politics hold up. Very French. But every time I pull over at a rest stop, I think about Fat Girl, about the windshield shattering as the murderer breaks in, depositing his axe in the head of Anais' cruel sister. Does Brea also split the nymph in two? One sister has the form, which is to say the looks, and the other the opacity. Years ago, I attended a screening of a documentary about Phil Spector, the Carlo Gesualdo of popular music. Do you know Gesualdo? He was a Renaissance composer who murdered his wife and her lover after catching them in bed together. Lala Brooks was there. She sings the lead on And Then He Kissed Me, a song I find almost as unbearable as Fuses. There was a Q&A, and one audience member after another raised a hand to tell Brooks that Spector, who would do things like pulling a gun in the recording studio, had abused her. She shifted on her feet and furrowed her brow. Yes, she said, but it was complicated. Murmurs of sympathy and disgust in the crowd. Someone told her she had PTSD. It became uncomfortably clear that the audience wanted Brooks to cry, to collapse and tremble and confess her injuries. The same as the cops in Fat Girl. The violence of the scene was stunning. It only made Phil Spector, who had recently been convicted of the murder of Lana Clarkson, seem even more omnipotent, a demonic force who could possess a crowd at Film Forum from 3,000 miles away in Corcoran State Prison between Bakersfield and Fresno, California. You've put this in words as well. I fear my pain interests you. It's the opposite, though. You're a better writer than me. I'm too committed to right angles. One gesture away from intended meaning is where beauty lies.
Dear Anahid, is that why I use punctuation like someone who can't handle angles? Here's the end, and I'm going to throw you off. Broder's Frames, 1972. Katie Nolan, Untitled Brick Wall, 1994-1995, right angles but also a mirage. Rena Spalling's The Bricks, 2006, not right angles. Love, Stephanie. Thank you, guys. We wanted to take questions. I know this is a little unconventional, maybe not exactly what you were expecting, and we would love to hear if you have any questions or anything else you want to add, any thoughts.
Thank you. I really loved it. I thought it was fascinating. I really enjoyed the exchange. And I had no idea where it was going, and I really enjoyed that part too. But I think my question really has to do with genre and why it is that you revive this medieval form. Because I find that really fascinating, because it seems like it's so archaic, and to revive it and bring it back into the public sphere is really fascinating to me. So can you speak to why that was the convention that you wanted to have this dialogue?
Yeah, I guess there's a sort of trivial answer to that, which is that, like, in the last, say, year and a half, I'm a romanticist by training, if you couldn't tell. But in the last year and a half, I became really, really obsessed with medieval poetry. And one of the things that seems particularly fascinating to me about it is that it's a time in literary history where the notion of a persona is really starting to emerge in a new and unique way. And so there's a way in which the dialogue form both affirms and then also challenges the idea of a poetic persona, because we ask ourselves, is the poet speaking in his own person or in her own person? And so that's particularly vexed in the cases of women writing or composing in medieval Europe, at least, which is the context I know best. Many women troubadours or women, let's say women troubadours, would write sometimes as men as well as themselves. And that position of writing as a man, affords a certain amount of authority, but it also necessarily undercuts the authority of the position that is being articulated. So we were playing, I think, a lot with the idea of what can be spoken and what remains unspoken within certain kinds of cultural contexts or literary contexts. And so it seemed a natural form in that sense, or a natural genre.
Yeah. No, I loved it. I thought it was really cool. Thank you.
Anybody else? Anybody else have anything to say?
Well, it was great. Yeah, thank you very much. I love the complete mix of sources and eras and genres. Well, what was the film?
Which one? The long one? The longer clip? That's Carolee Schneemann's Fuses.
Okay.
It's longer.
Gotcha.
How many? Actually, we were talking about this.
Yeah.
How many people have seen that movie in its entirety?
Wow. Fascinating. Where did you guys see it? Can I ask?
I saw it in a university
Okay.
in Maryland.
Yeah.
Same?
No, I got it in a library. Actually, one of the times, I saw it twice. The one time I saw it, the projector actually melted the film. And nobody knew, it was like nobody knew what was happening. So, yeah.
Oh, that's hilarious.
We found that really fascinating too because Carolee has a special place for both of us. She's actually a close friend of mine. And part of what I find interesting about Fuses in terms of what I'm interested in, the cool thing about us is we're interested in different things but similar things, is that when it premiered at Cannes, I forget the exact year, a lot of the male critics, and I tried to get footage of this actually, but and from her foundation, and they're looking for it now, but it's been well documented. A lot of the male critics went crazy, like slashed the seats, like seriously. And there was what is it called? The stuffing was coming out because they couldn't understand why they thought they were going to see a pornographic film, but it was from a female perspective. And so they were expecting the other kinds of titillations, and instead they saw this, and they got very upset by it. And I think that was a seminal moment, and nobody understood. I mean, Carolee was, shunned, did not have very much recognition in her life, and, we all talk about Fuses. It's cited, Interior Scroll might be the work best of hers, in which she pulls this, written scroll out of her vagina and performs it, and, that's another common Carolee work, but we thought it was really interesting that, everyone's seen The Spiral Jetty. How many people here have seen the Smithson film about land art, The Spiral Jetty? Okay, well, more people than have seen Fuses, and maybe that's not the best example, but we thought that was a really interesting thing, and we wanted to show this, the foundation sent us this clip, a longer clip, because you can't see it anywhere, really.
Yeah.
So.
No, it's not widely. If you can get your hands on it in any way, usually, again, I saw it also at a university, which is interesting, and Carolee was there herself, which was sort of magical. But it's incredibly profound and moving, as well as very difficult film, because one of the things that you confront when you watch it is, as Stephanie just said, how often do you see pornography, not just from a woman's point of view or a particularly gendered point of view, but how often do you see pornography that looks like that, right? That's not building toward a climax, right? That's not teleological. It's not like, okay, first there's going to be this, then there's going to be this, and there's going to be an orgasm, and that's it, right? So the movie, moves in a kind of wave that reminds you of what? Reminds you of what sex is really like, someone has to pee, someone wants a drink of water, something fell over, you have to get out, you have to get up, you stop, you talk, it's embarrassing, you laugh together, right? So
It's a little uncomfortable.
It's uncomfortable, yeah. So you don't know what's going to happen next. Just that what you said earlier, right? You don't know what's going to happen next always. I mean, hopefully. Right? Hopefully you don't know what's going to happen next, right? Unless you're into that. But yeah, so there's something about the rhythm of the movie that's very challenging and that throws people off, but it's incredibly beautiful. So if you could get your hands on it in any way, you should try to do that.
Anything else? We were really into the idea of the bricks, yes?
Yes, I have a question. I noticed that most of your references were fine art references, and you clearly have this affinity for the visual arts, and that clearly you're a novelist. And I'm interested in kind of the connection between the two, and I'm really interested in people who draw inspiration from something outside of perhaps the medium or the field they're working in.
I mean, I would say I would probably be better at, and a lot of my work has to do with the visual arts or film stills or cinematic things rather than being able to. I mean, first of all, I'm not an academic. I'm not as well schooled as my interlocutor, so maybe I was protecting myself a little there too, because I can show you the image and then you can decide. But a lot of my work is also about absence, and so I don't have as much to say. I have what to say that's not being said, so to speak. And I think she understands that about my work as well, and that became possible to show in images. And the brick to me is very important a lot of our work has political undertones, both of us, and the brick to me has such, if you want to get down to as simple as the poster of throwing the brick from 1968, has so many political reverberations that it became funny, because she lived in one of her notes, the word was kind of used without even thinking. As we said, like, this is a very real dialogue. We had exchanging emails, and I was like, wow, that's so funny, because the brick to me, you send someone the brick emoji, I think it's almost a lot more potent than sending them the flaming heart, because it's like, let's break something, or let's rebuild something, or any of those things. And a lot of Anahid's work too has to do with the politics behind the symbols. So
I see.
I was curious about the references you were making to Judaism and the Jewish mystical tradition. I mean, obviously, you expressed quite a bit, in the text. But I was curious if there was anything you cared to
Yeah. Well, also another thing we actually didn't talk about at the end was the pomegranate, which became a huge symbol for us, and is also a huge symbol in Judaism and Jewish anarchism, which is something I'm very personally interested in. And a lot of the word for pomegranate is the same as the word for grenade. And not only in Hebrew, it began in Latin, and it also carries on in French. There's a Broders poem that he loved to play with words that uses the double entendre of pomegranate and grenade, which in and of itself is kind of an amazing double meaning. Yeah. And so we kind of, loving those kind of things, the like Gestapo, the Canadian kind of nod, and also Anahid's name being like Anais. We very much both like those kind of sequences or coincidences or not coincidences, and so. For me also, the Hebrew letters are very meaningful, in different ways, and it just became a motif that kept. And also, linking back, the Jean-Luc Nancy shattered, vessel is an idea of Jewish anarchism, of rebuilding the world. And then not many people know that Tikkun comes from Tikkun Olam. Even people who are well versed in the politics of it, And so, I didn't know that. Maybe other people do, but I thought that was really interesting. And it just became something that, we both really were able to talk about the things that interest us and kind of pull them together, which in its own way is kind of, not to be cheesy, but a kind of love, I guess, when your references can work with one another but yet aren't the same and actually can make sense.
Jack, you had your hand up.
Pardon?
Didn't you have your hand
No.
up?
Anything else?
Is this a one-time only thing?
We're going to do it in London as well, and it's probably going to be a series of other exchanges between us that will continue. We were continuing this dialogue, so who knows what could come out of it. Maybe a book, maybe, we have a lot to say. So,
yeah.
How aware of what you're going to do with this are you when you're doing it, when you're writing it?
Oh, that's really interesting.
Does it become performative, even unconsciously?
I actually think the best parts of it came out of it not being, literally, I sent myself a note to remind myself I wanted to use in my writing one day after you said to me the word grenade, and I did send it back to myself, and then that became a thing. And then, a lot of the best parts of it came out of literally, like you used the word brick, and we weren't considering using the word brick. So I think the best parts were subconscious in the way of psychoanalysis showing us the subconscious speaking, you can speak to this better as the daughter of psych. No, but don't you think a lot of it was not thought? It may have been conscious, but it was subconscious.
Yeah, the thing I was going to say, which is not psychoanalytic, but we haven't known each other for very long, so I think that partly we were courting each other. through the exchange. And so in that sense, it's theatrical because you're trying to not just impress, but also trying to insinuate yourself into the other person's thought processes.
And their languages.
And their languages, and then showing that you can take their language and you can play with it and you understand, and then, see. So there was a kind of flirtatiousness that I think, has an element of deliberation behind it. But other than that, it was very free-flowing.
Yeah,
I think that we would have been talking to each other anyway, and I think at some point Stephanie said, I think this is a talk or something, so, yeah.
In that context, how much editing did you do, and who did it? Like,
None.Uld you believe it? Like literally, we cut and pasted the emails. We're like, let's give this a try. We wanted it to feel really real, and not a canned or however you say it.
Yeah, I took one line out because it implicated somebody. Once I found out it was videotaped, I took something out because I didn't want to get in trouble. But other than that, yeah, mostly unedited.
Just one line is pretty good.
Yeah.
But it's also funny because the courting thing, I think, is really real, right? Because nowadays, when we, a lot of the dynamics when you're getting to know someone are through messaging in these ways, and the idea of a courtship as a message goes back to that medieval thing, right? A little Princess de Clèves, a little our back and forth maybe through emojis and witticisms and not necessarily the old way, but it's still happening and it's still a way of seducing.
Thank you.
Thank you guys.